Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Patient Exchange Improving Diversity in Clinical Trials program. I'm Tiffany Drummond, a patient advocate with over 20 years of experience in cancer research. My journey as a care partner began when my mother was diagnosed with endometrial cancer in 2014. I quickly realized the challenges of finding reliable information to support her care, and I am committed to helping others avoid similar difficulties. That's why we at the Patient Story create program like today's to help you figure out what comes next. Think of us as your go-to guide for navigating not only the cancer journey, but your overall health journey. From diagnosis to treatment, we've got you covered with real life patient stories and educational programming with subject matter experts and inspirational patient advocates and guests. I truly am your personal cheerleader, here to help you and your loved ones best communicate with your healthcare team as you go from diagnosis through treatment and survivorship. Before we get to our speakers, we want to thank our sponsor, J&J, for its support, which helps us host more of these programs for free to our audience. The Patient Story retains full editorial control over all content as always. I must also thank all of our promotional partners for their support. It is because of you our programming reaches the audience who needs it. I hope you'll find today's program helpful, but please keep in mind the information provided is not a substitute for medical advice. Finally, we know there's a lot you want to know more about or at least discuss or tune into, so please let us know what those are along with what we could do better. A survey will pop up after the program ends, so make sure you don't go anywhere. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for. You may be wondering, what exactly is diversity in clinical research and why is this so important? Diversity in and of itself is vast in terms of what it means in specific settings. Today, we're going to focus on the experiences of Black patients. So, for instance, when we look at cancer and chronic conditions that increase the risk of developing cancer, Black people, who make up 14% of the US population, have a higher incidence and mortality rate. Research is going to be paramount in understanding and eliminating this disparity. Yet, only 5 to 7% of Black patients are clinical trial participants. But the panel you're about to meet today is representative of those who do go on clinical trials. The conversation, I know, is going to be one that I hope resonates with everyone within and outside the Black and African American community in order to help us all move research and development forward and accessible to all. So, without further ado, enjoy the program. Thank you, everyone, for attending this great conversation that we're going to be having today, which is clinical trials and having a patient exchange, a true discussion where we can talk about these barriers that we know exist in the African American and Black community and that hesitation that some of us often feel when we want to go on a clinical trial. But who I have with me today are actual clinical trial participants, some current, some former. And I really think this conversation is going to be something that's going to resonate with us, especially in the Black and African American community, because we don't often talk about it, except when we're thinking about the mistrust and things that we're going to get into for this conversation. So, joining me today, I have some incredible panelists and patient advocates that I want to introduce to the Patient Story audience. My name is Tiffany Drummond. I'm sure you've seen my face before, and I lead community programming. I'm also a clinical trial and patient advocate, so I'm excited to be here. I also have with me Tony Williams, who you may have recognized before from a story, but Tony is actually with the patient story as well, as he is our director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also a diffuse large B cell lymphoma survivor. So, Tony, thank you so much for being here today. We also have Gwendolyn, who is a cervical cancer survivor. We have Sharice, who is a non-small cell lung cancer survivor. And then also what's important, because not all clinical trials are cancer-based. And so I happen to have three patients who aren't cancer patients, but they were on clinical trials or at least screened for clinical trials for a chronic condition, which are uterine fibroids. And so I'm happy to have Letitia, Latasha, and Kayla here. And so this conversation, if you're familiar with the patient story, those of you out there, a lot of times, often we're talking about the medical aspect of our patient story and experience. But what I want to talk about today is really getting to the point of clinical trials, right? And so I'm going to ask everyone this, but I'll start with you, Kayla. How did you first learn about clinical trials? Was it through a healthcare provider? Were you already kind of well versed in this space? What was that experience like for you?
Actually, my mom was diagnosed with uterine fibroids, and she learned from her gynecologist that this clinical trial was going on. I didn't even know I had fibroids. Actually, I was diagnosed at the trial, then I followed up with my healthcare provider. So, actually, it really opened my eyes to my diagnosis.
Right, absolutely. Tony, what about you? Were you familiar with clinical trials before you started this journey?
Yeah, I've always been familiar with clinical trials, stemming all the way back from Tuskegee to Henrietta Lacks. But for me, in my case, when I was diagnosed in 2021, stage four, my frontline treatment was R-CHOP, and that wasn't as successful as we needed it to be. So I relapsed, and then I had CAR T. But at that time, CAR T was being developed throughout various stages and elements of cancer, and it wasn't available for my type of cancer. So it went about 4 or 5 months. Um, CAR T came online for my stage cancer, and went through CAR T, relapsed. And so participating in that clinical trial was a giving back and a next stage for me. And so I kind of segued into it because I failed my first front and second line treatments. And so my doctor, we had this clinical trial, and we can go into that a little bit later, but that's kind of how I fell into it.
All right, perfect, perfect. So, Sharice, what about you? Were you always familiar with clinical trials, or is this something that happened when you started your cancer journey?
Yeah, I was absolutely ignorant to what cancer was, what clinical trials was. It was just not my world when I was first diagnosed in 2014. I'm happy to have been living now for 10.5 years, living with an active cancer in non-small cell lung cancer. So when I first heard about the clinical trial, it was through the hospitalist team of doctors when you get initially diagnosed. So the one oncologist, she said, well, um, we really don't, I don't have anything because you need a certain resource. You need resources to have clinical trials in your local um, clinic. She didn't have access to it, and I needed to stop listening to the monkeys that were in my head and accept my diagnosis and accept the intravenous chemo that she was giving me. I stayed 1 month with her and then decided to get a second opinion from the University of Michigan. There I had more options. But as I lived longer, who knew? Like my sister here, Gwen, she'll tell you, we keep living. And so in 2022 at Stanford University, when I moved to California, I had no idea that the mutations from the targeted therapy would no longer respond to any treatment. So they started popping up and growing. So Dr. Neal, who I have a great respect for, a trust for, I learned to trust him. So he said for 2 years, he looked out for a trial for me, and they worked at Stanford to get it to their hospital so that I can try it. And I'm on it right now, today. I am in my fourth cycle of it. I'm doing well. The tumors are disappearing on this trial, even. So I'm excited to look at a possible another 10 years of living with a deadly cancer.
At least, okay. So that is a perfect story to share because you went from being someone who didn't even know what the cancer was, let alone a clinical trial, and now here you are saying again, knowing medical terms and things that you didn't know before, and so that is inspirational at best. Okay. So speaking of Gwen, tell me, did you know what a clinical trial was, or like how did this come into your purview?
I knew about clinical trials because my father was diagnosed with lung cancer, but I had a bad taste in my mouth about clinical trials because I was a daddy's girl. My dad did clinical trials and they didn't work for him. So I had, you know, had a bad taste in my mouth, like, oh, they don't work.
So now that we got to the point where we're talking about learning about clinical trials and how we came to know about them, let's talk about the screening process. So, Tony, I'm going to start with you. Can you share your experience about the screening process itself? And was that something that was stressful for you? Did you feel supported? Kind of give me that experience.
Well, thank you, Tiffany. For me, the screening was the next step. Because again, like I mentioned, I had failed my first two lines of defense. Because I was at UNC Chapel Hill Medical Center, they offer a lot of different types of screenings and trials that they do on their own. So my screening wasn't sponsored by biopharma or industry. So I was part of a university program that they were working on. And so, because my oncologist was heading up that, because UNC is a teaching hospital, it was easy for me to be screened. I didn't have to go through anything, just do I want to participate? Yes or no. And it was just that easy. But you always have that anxiety because you never know. Whatever you're participating in, you want to see that desired result at the end, and that is to be completely made whole and healed. And so, going into any of these things, you're always going to have apprehension, but it's the next step, and you come this far. So, I came that far. So, screening was easy for me, and to participate in that trial was a no-brainer for me.
Right. No, absolutely. And that just brings up to a point that I think Shirese even made earlier too, about where to go and where you can access clinical trials, right? A lot of times, oftentimes, it is going to be a large academic research center. But not everybody has that. So there are some local sites out there as well. We just have to kind of get that knowledge to the community about where these sites exist. But absolutely, going to a larger research center like a UNC is going to definitely be one of those things where you get a lot of that comprehensive care that you want. So I do want to ask this to you, Letitia. When you were going through the screening process, did you have any hesitancy about the screening process? Also, more importantly, were there any barriers for you, say with transportation, or did you have to travel far? What was that experience like for you just with the screening?
Okay, so with the screening, so I've been in hospitality, so it was hard to get my schedule to go with the availability of the times. So I had to wait a little longer than anticipated to get my first appointment to even go in to, get the first information on everything I needed to do because of my work schedule. So that was pretty hard. And it was probably like 15 or 16 miles away. And I don't drive. So those different things, were barriers for me when I started the screening process.
Thank you for being transparent about that. And oftentimes when I'm speaking, and I'm sure we've all experienced this, is that those are barriers that exist and can prevent you from actually going on a clinical trial. Maybe you are eligible, but if you can't get there, and we know trials, you tend to have to go more often than when you would for your standard care because it's just more comprehensive. They're doing a lot of data collection. And so these are things that I know the medical community and especially the research community is looking into when they develop protocols into how can we build these added costs that are going to affect our participants to be able to support them in that, right? Whether it's transportation, whether it's lodging, food, childcare, all of those things that we know exist. So thank you, Letitia, for being transparent about that. Thank you so much. And so my next question is going to be regarding the actual treatment. Okay, this is where I know. And so again, this conversation is specific to the Black and African American community participating in clinical trials. So one of those barriers, hesitations, and mistrust issues come into the intervention itself. So this question is going to go out to the participants who received an intervention, investigational drug, or investigational procedure. I'm going to start with Shirese because Shirese, you shook your head like, girl, I have the answer for you. So what can you tell me about the information you received when you were told about the clinical trial and what your treatment was going to be? And did you feel, if you did, it's totally fine. Did you feel like you were some test subject or some guinea pig when they were telling you this information? It's an honest, safe space here with the patient story.
When I heard about the NVL 655, which is a clinical trial for advanced stage 4 cancer, which I have been having for 10.5 years, mind you. For someone to come and tell me after fighting that long that we got something for you. I've been watching it. This is how my doctor is speaking to me. I've been watching your cancer. I've been watching you and getting to know you. So I think that this is good for you. So the doctor patient trust was already there because I trusted him along the journey just by other things that he was doing. He said, well, we're going to counteract your cancer this way. We're going to try this, slow it down. But the resistant mutations are always going to pop up. But I got something for you. We're just going to wait. So what he was trying to do, okay, Tiffany, was get his clinic ready to receive all of the foundation, the structure, the resources needed to accommodate me in that trial as much as they could. I did ask about transportation and all those barriers because I would have to go every week. It was an investigational drug, and I'm a power horse. If it's hope attached to it, then I'm gonna try it. Okay, so and I'm not influenced by culture. I'm not influenced by none of that. I'm influenced by my trust first in God, and then in my trust in I had discernment to know that through the actions of my doctor. Like I said, I can't speak for everybody, because if you don't have that connection and trust with your doctor, I say find another one. But yes, the NVL 655 clinical trial, I had no problem with going into that because it was fully explained. I knew what my risks were. They sent it to me by email. I had a month before I signed the consent form. I was very well informed. And I knew that he was waiting on that trial for me.
Here's the question that's really going to need some unpacking, okay? Especially in the Black and African American community, when it comes to treatment. We don't really understand placebo, right? Especially when it comes to interventions like cancer or chronic conditions. And so before I even get into that, to clarify, because there is a clarifying point about that, I'm gonna start with you, Gwendolyn. What were your thoughts and what are your thoughts? You can still have these thoughts as well. What are your thoughts on placebo-controlled clinical trials?
After someone tell you you got 15 months to live, you like whatever you can do to keep me alive and to see my grandchildren grow up,
Come on, somebody.
you gonna do whatever you have to do. I was at the point after the doctor told me 16 months to live, I knew I had some more living to do. She said you have to trust the team. You got to trust God first, then you got to trust the team, the medical team. And I trusted MD Anderson. I met Dr. Jan. She was a doctor I met at what I'm with an organization called Survivor, and I met her at a retreat. And she was a doctor at MD Anderson, and I was going to another hospital at the time. And I used to be a case manager, so I was out there having so many issues as a case manager. I needed a case manager. So I was at the retreat and I was crying to her. I was like, they don't really care about the Black women. They don't care about the women in my community. And she said, she looked across that table and she said, I care. Call me when you get back. And when I say she have been true to her word, and I reached out to her and I say, hey, I need to know some things about clinical trials. She let her team reach out to me. And hey, it's all about trust.
Mhm. Absolutely, absolutely.
Can I say one more thing real quick? What the study coordinator gave me her personal cell phone number. So I knew I was going to be in good hands.
Right. And so what often happens too is when you do go on a clinical trial, you do get more comprehensive care. You just do, because again, we're collecting data. So it's not just, okay, come here and get treated. It's like, no, we really want to know, is this working for you? Right. And maybe it doesn't, but guess what? It may work for the next person or the next patient. And so these experiences, again, is what this program really is about, because I want to really express shared experiences when it comes to clinical trials, because we don't often get to see that experience, right? We only get to kind of read about it or hear about the bad things that happen. And so, Kayla, for you, I'm going to ask you too about placebo. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because this is going to be big. I'm telling you, this is going to be where people really listen. What do you think about placebos on clinical trials?
So automatically you go in there and you say, hey, we're going to try this trial and I'm going to be healed. That is the positive aspect, but not everyone is getting the medication. You may be getting the aspirin. And so you're not understanding that a placebo has to be in effect. So I think that a lot of people should go in there. First of all, try to do as much research as you can and try to also reach out to people, the staff or someone that you connect with or you have a rapport with on the team. Ask them. They can't really tell you. Sometimes they can't really tell you if you have a placebo. Of course, they can't tell you. It will mess up the trial, correct? So you might drop out. You might have emotional experiences, and it's just very overwhelming for you. So I think that we should know. However, we cannot know, of course, but I think that we should go in there knowing that, hey, I might receive the placebo and the next person next to me might receive the medication and they might get treated. And who knows, that person next to you might not, they may receive the treatment and it not work for them. So it's all about researching and trying your best, trying to understand as much as you can, because there's a lot of information out there and it discourages everyone from trying to be a part of the trials. And people use these verbiage that a lot of the community don't know. A lot of us can relate to a fourth grade level using verbiage like that. But a lot of the staff members, they do not. And especially with our community, they look at us, hey, you don't know? Why don't you know? Instead of explaining in depth. So I think that I'm a little 50-50 with the placebo because I am proud of the trial, but I understand why the placebo is needed.
Right. So I'm glad you said that, right? So this is what I always drive home. Anyone on a clinical trial, okay? Anyone on a clinical trial, you will never not get anything. That is just unethical. So if you go on a clinical trial, you are at least going to get the standard for your condition. You're never not going to get that. So what may happen is we will give you that standard in addition to whatever investigational drug we're researching, or you might get a placebo. And so oftentimes in our community, we think, well, they're not giving me anything. And this is like my last resort. So I'm just getting a placebo. I'm coming there getting a water pill, and I'm not getting my chemotherapy, or I'm not getting my pills to shrink my tumor for my fibroids, which is not true. Now, there are some placebo where, you're going to either get this or you're going to get that. And that's all. And that's something where, again, that's a decision that we have to make for ourselves and with our families, that we're not really willing to do that. We want to just do what the standard is. And so thank you for saying that, because I wanted an honest answer. You know what I mean? You all were honest answers, but that's a lot of oftentimes what I get is that, saying, well, I want to know what I'm getting. And we know in research that's just not always going to be possible. But and you can ask, if you are going into an office and they're offering you a clinical trial, say, what's the minimum I'm going to get? Am I going to get treated for my condition, no matter what it is? It's a headache or diabetes, whatever. Just say, but what is my alternative? And they should tell you that in the consenting process, what your alternatives are and what your the options you're going to be getting on that trial. So thank you so much for bringing that up. Well, I brought it up, but thank you for answering that for me. So I have a question for you, Letitia, because you're not quiet back there, but I haven't called on you. So when you went on that clinical trial, what were your expectations? Like your honest expectations of like, okay, I'm going to go do this trial, but what were your thoughts on what you wanted to happen, and what were you realistic about? Maybe it might not work or it might work.
So I really just wanted to be more informed as well. I knew I had had fibroids for a long time. I was trying to figure out what my other options were. I didn't want to do the surgery at all. So this would have been an option to not have to do the surgery. But due to the resources given to the clinical study, the clinical trial, they didn't have the resources to actually see where my fibroids were, if that makes sense. Mine weren't like, I guess, inside, they were kind of outside. So she wasn't able to see exactly where they were, which was something I didn't know before. I didn't know they could be in multiple places. So I got a lot more knowledge, but I just didn't want to have the surgery. I wanted the bleeding to slow down or stop. That's pretty much what I was going to the trial for. I did not want to have the surgery at all.
Did you enroll or were you considered a screen failure?
I was enrolled. I had to give like samples of my I had to go and do samples. They kept trying to get the ultrasound, like they would say come different times of the month. Maybe that would work for her to be able to see, but she only could do the vaginal ultrasound. She couldn't send me for an MRI or anything that wasn't a part of the screening, the study, and whatever. So I probably went for about maybe 3 months and took stuff. So yeah, but when they couldn't get the imaging that they needed to get, then that's when I had to stop going.
Right, absolutely. So what about you, Latasha? Are you still on a clinical trial, Latasha, or are you done with the clinical trial? And would you consider going on another one?
I'm not. I'm at the beginning of this clinical trial. I started my endometriosis journey maybe a couple of years ago, where I had my fibroids and they were small, and then they got to a point where they started to bother me so much where I was hurting and bleeding, just like ridiculous. So I got them removed. I'm a firm believer, like I don't like to have surgery either, but when they say remove something that's not supposed to be placed, I'm all for it. You know what I'm saying? Because they give you a better chance to regroup, and then it allows the researchers to see how fast that this tissue is growing, or you know what I'm saying, how much thickness in the lining of the uterus is accumulate each month, because they're able to start tracking, what they couldn't see before these fibroids start growing, or before, you know what I'm saying, the uterus started getting picking up and different things of that nature. It's kind of hard to go by what everybody else said, because they had some good points about, the placebo you get.
Well, thank you for sharing your journey, and I know it's going to be a successful one. So please keep us updated on your journey. And again, with placebos, again, that's going to just be a conversation I think it's going to just be an ongoing conversation. But you really can get a placebo where it is nothing, but you're not going to just get nothing. And they're going to say, okay, we're going to just let your tumor spread, and we're going to that's never going to happen. That just is unethical. However, I do want to talk about this too, because oftentimes also we are afraid of the unknown. And when I say we, I'm talking about culturally in the Black and African American community, with valid reason. So, right? I'm going to ask you, when you were on a clinical trial, did you experience any adverse effects that you felt were, okay, this is super weird? Or how did the side effects to you differ than when you were on any standard therapy that you were on a clinical trial?
Well, first of all, anytime you're diagnosed with cancer or any other modality, there is a level of faith that you have to have and that will be activated during your journey. You're going to believe in God, but you're also going to believe in that medicine that God can work through. So we just want to put that disclaimer out there. For me, having CAR T was terrible. Now, I had a very aggressive chemotherapy regimen, but CAR T was worse because it was coming off a clinical trial, and I was getting that as a second line front defense, right? And just so the procedure that I had to go through with the extracting of my blood and taking it to a lab and getting it re-engineered and giving it back to you, that is a lot of trauma for your body. And so going into that, knowing that I have received the worst chemotherapy that they have, and that didn't solve this, but I still got to keep my faith knowing at the end, I'm going to see this. I'm going to see this through. And then you go through CAR T, because in my experience, when I did CAR T, I did 21 days, 6 months of chemo. Well, when I did my CAR T therapy, over that 6 month period that I got that chemo, they gave me that in 3 days. So I literally felt like I was seeing death. I mean, darkness came over me because it was so aggressive with my body, and my body was just in shock. And I recall the first day that happened, I just was out of sorts. And the second day I made it up to there and I passed the chapel, and I said, I can't do this, but I knew I could. And I had. And so it was very, very hard. But one thing during my journey, and even still now, I never asked the question why. Never. Is why not me? Why can't I be the one to be the one that helps somebody get through this. And so I made it through that chemo, but it was the CAR T, but it was unknown. I was afraid, even though I didn't admit it, because you have to create this false reality, right? You have to exist in a reality that's not really there for you, but that's where you're going to exist. Because if you exist in the right now, you will not get through this. You have to exist in a realm that's beyond where you are. And so it was very challenging and it was tough. And that not knowing even if it was going to work is even more excruciating because you knew what you had already been through. And now I'm going through this. Never felt like a guinea pig. I felt like it was necessary. And the way that drugs come to the market now is not like it was back in Tuskegee or Henrietta Lacks times, or even beyond that. They have to do what they can to bring that drug to market. So when you enter into a clinical trial, like Tiffany said, you are getting the best of what they have because they want that to succeed. And so you are a frontline participant of the best of what they have. And so if I can just round it off, I mean, yeah, it was traumatizing, it was excruciating, it was painful. Um, Parts of me wanted to doubt. But when you've come this far, like Sharice was saying, and you were stage 4, what do you got to lose? God has already proved that he's with you, right? When they give you a ticking clock and say you got 1 to 3 years and you pass that, what do you have to lose except to continue to believe? And so that was my mentality going through that. But I experienced all that realm of that. And even being in it now, I still experience that, but it's too late now. I've already won.
Right. And so I feel like I want to get some more comments on that. I definitely want to hear Gwendolyn, what do you think about that? For me, as a caregiver to someone who did not go on a clinical trial, but I knew about clinical trials. That's kind of what I did for a living. Understanding that some of these drugs are toxic, whether they come to market or not. They just are toxic. And so when you go through that on a clinical trial, does it make you doubt, am I doing the right thing? Or is it really like Tony said, like, you know what, I know it's going to be hard, but I'm going to push through this. What was your experience like with that?
You know what? Tony says so much that is so true. When you stage 4, and I did radiation and chemo already. And when I say radiation and chemo kick my butt, I had every symptom on the list I had. So I was at a point where, what you got, I knew I was a fighter. I was leaning against the ropes. I wasn't standing anymore. I was just leaning against the ropes. So I was like, hey, I want to live. Let's try. I tried everything. Herbs, when you fighting stage 4, everybody, all your friends and all your family got the remedy. So everybody calling and saying, just eat right. Don't eat no meat. Juice. Did that. Okay. Don't do nothing but herbs. I did that. I was everybody guinea pig anyway. so, so I was like, look.
Get the clinical trial, like my family is doing this.
So in the Black community, everybody got a remedy. So I was like, you know what? Let's go. And I like Tony was saying, like you stage 4, you done already been, you're already getting this beating. So let's try something new. So, but the crazy part about it, when I tried clinical trials, they put me on steroids too, because mine is in my bones. I gained weight and got stronger. So I was like, okay. So, hey, so I tell people all the time, I'm a walking billboard now. I am alive because of clinical trial. If you want to send somebody, send me. Like in the Black community, when God say, send me, I will tell you, I am alive today, first because of God, but second because of the clinical trials. Because I was dying from radiation and chemo. I had 3 strokes and 2 heart attacks. Hey, I'm team clinical trials. Can't tell me nothing different.
Okay, I'm gonna go to you, Sharice, only because I do want to hear your experience as well. Because again, I think this is something that really isn't talked about a lot, which is, experiencing side effects when you go on these trials, not realizing that, you can have these same side effects with drugs that are on the market as well. But when you were going through your treatment on the clinical trial, did you ever feel at a point where you were like, okay, is this the right thing to do? Or should I think about, going off? Did you ever have those thoughts? Or what was that like for you?
Absolutely. Ditto to everything that was said by Gwendolyn and Tony. I think his name is Tony. Where did he go? Yeah. So, anyways, muscle myalgia edema was big for me in the initial stage of my diagnosis. Muscle myalgia was so bad that the cramping, the abdominal pain, I even got C. diff, y'all. C. diff, I don't know if y'all know what C. diff is, but at one stage of my journey, I got C. diff so bad. And it was on Christmas Day. I had to go into the hospital for 2 weeks just to be treated with it because my own feces was not giving me good bacteria. I know that sounds gross. Well, guess what else sounds gross? Mustard greens. I love mustard greens. It's Thanksgiving, y'all. I just cooked some the earlier part of this week so that I can have them ready for this Thursday. So I got greedy. I said, well, let me just eat a couple of bowls. I tried a couple of bowls. Now I'm in this new trial. It tore me up. I had to lay down there cramped. And I said, what's wrong? What happened? Sometimes just doing the natural things that you think culturally, that you can do every year. Maybe some of that has to change. So it's the side effects can come out of the blue. You don't even know when they're going to hit you. So what I had to do, I nurtured myself this week, and I hope that I was feeling well enough for this story. That's how I roll when it comes to side effects. I'm at a place where I stay surrendered. So if I'm going to do the trials and the treatments, I have to stay surrendered and I have to stay resilient because yes, even my own people, I've always believed in God. I've always believed in Jesus. But when I got diagnosed with cancer, let me tell you what happened. It was like, what did you do wrong? Oh, you need to forgive somebody. Now I'm glad that the cancer, come on, somebody's laughing. Somebody in the clinical trial, the cancer trial, when I go to Stanford, they issue an NCC, let me put my glasses on because this is important. I want y'all to know this, especially in the Black community. They issue a NCCN distress thermometer. That is a survey that assess your well-being from week to week by the time you come in, am I right? By the time you come into your clinical appointment to see where your psychological state of mind is at. Fighting cancer, I told myself I'm not going to get excited. Fighting cancer is just as much mental as it is physical. Even if I feel myself choking because I got the trauma of all it was a cough. How did a cough turn into stage 4? So when I cough now and clear my throat, because I still sing on the worship team, I say, wait a minute, I'll cough and then I'll say, tell myself, self, don't you over cough. Self, cough just enough. Self, get you some water. Self, I have to talk to myself like that. It may sound crazy to you, but it works for me. And I've been doing that for the last 10.5 years. But I tell myself also that I was created. I had to read the word for myself, the faith community. I love everybody, but I had to get deeper into finding a purpose as to why am I still here. I can tell y'all right now, I'm not going anywhere until I have done everything that my creator has prepared for me to do in advance. So with that being said, I take that kind of power, that mental state of mind. I get to know my team that I'm assigned to, because my prayers is, what should I be doing? Who should I be doing it with? And where? I'm at Stanford. The people that I'm working with are those particular people. I am present. I am all in. And when I do decide whatever treatment that I'm going to do, I don't attach any cultural baggage to it because I know it comes from a place of fear. I can't live in fear. I have to trust today. I have to trust God today, and I have to trust the people of today. If I don't trust who I'm around, it's not going to work anyway.
Thank you for sharing that. You all, thank you again for just being so transparent with your journey. And I did kind of want to ask, because again, I know that we're very heavy in the space of cancer just because the patient story is as well. But we do care about all health. And so I do want to ask Kayla, Letitia, and Latasha, for your clinical trial, was there an intervention in terms of a medication, a procedure, or is it more blood collection and kind of measuring, lining, like all those things? So what kind of was what did they tell you was your intervention? I'm gonna start with you, Kayla.
So the intervention, first they have to, of course, confirm that you have fibroids, right? So you can be on the trial. They ask you a set of questions, about the bleeding and everything to see if you qualify for the trial. So like myself, I got to a certain point and they told me, hey, it's nothing they can do. They needed more resources, like Letitia said. So MRI confirms that how big and the location of the fibroids, correct? And then with the fibroids, it can enlarge the uterus. And just like Letitia said, it can be on the uterus, behind the uterus, in different locations. So they weren't too sure. They knew the size of mine and they knew that I had many, but they didn't know the location. Now, I think I'm rambling. I forgot your question. uh, so they told me to make sure I count how many sanitary napkins I was going through. I kept a log so that way I had to journal how often I had to change my sanitary napkins, or how often I had to take ibuprofen or anything for pain management. So they wanted to make sure before they gave an intervention. I had to log all of this and I had to journal. Of course, you had to see them 1,000 times plus more, right? They had to collect samples. So my intervention was to just make sure I control it as possible. Of course, they tell you things like your diet with any disease is important. Are you exercising? Are you a smoker? Are you drinking alcohol? So these play an effect of that. So I would say they contributed to the intervention as well. So that was my intervention. It wasn't necessarily I took medication to assist me. It was just the non-pharmacological method that I had to do.
Right. And I know, Latasha, you're at the beginning, but what this kind of shows collectively is that when we say intervention, people automatically think it's a drug, and that's not true. It could be collecting data about what are you eating, right? Or, how are your periods every month, right? Those are things that also need to be collected, because oftentimes what we don't understand as well collectively as a community, which is what I always drive home, and I think we all do since we are proponents of clinical research, is that the data that we're looking at is not representative of the people who it affects the most. And none of these chronic conditions like cancer, like reproductive issues that women have, maternal health, these things that disproportionately affect Black and African Americans in high incidence and mortality. We're never going to find the answer about why that's happening if we don't get data from the people it's happening to. And so I think what this conversation has shown, because you all have been passionate in your answers, and that for me, I think spreads a lot more message than someone reading something that they don't really understand, right? These are shared experiences. So what can we do to bridge that gap to make clinical trials less fearful? Like you said, Cherie. So what can we do to do that? I think one, having these type of conversations is great, but
I think a couple of you mentioned, oh, no, Gwen. I was talking to Gwen earlier, and having a heart to heart with not only our family members, because we're the best ones that can spread the message. We can spread the message in our churches because that's where we are. Go to where we are and give that message. And I think it was Kayla. Sorry, my glasses are off. Um, she was mentioning layman's terms, a simple language, a nice brochure. Maybe I can find a leaflet about any one of these kind of chronic diseases that affect mostly the African American community, put them in common places, Walmart, the churches. How about some of the predominantly underserved schools that are heavy, the demographics is mostly Blacks? Go there and leave some literature that is a visual representation or visually depicted so that we can easily read it and say, and what about information about the screening? So go to where we are, and put it in. Don't be afraid to speak a little faith language, just to get on the inside and let them know that you care. It's the heart to heart. That's how we're going to respond and know and have better access. Places like that, the corner store.
Anybody else? I'm open to all of these suggestions because I really believe that, our life experience is our expertise. And so us sharing that is really going to make the difference. I know for me, I agree with all of that. I talk about clinical research to anyone that will, if they're listening, I want to promote it. To just say, these are things that we really want to understand, because we're always asking why. Why us? Why are we always getting this? No one can ever give us an answer. And the only way we're going to get that is that we have to look at data. And I'd rather look at it before we're not here. I'd rather look at it while we are here. What about you? Tony, you got something? Yeah.
Yeah, what I have found over my travels with the patient story being the head of diversity is what I try to stress is overall health awareness. Because when you go to the places that Sharice is talking about, to our churches and civic centers, just where we gather, cancer is not just the one single modality. There are always something attached to it, whether it's high blood pressure, high cholesterol, sugar diabetes. And I believe that we as African American people have a lack of awareness overall about our health. Cancer manifests itself, but somebody else is manifesting something else. But if we can get to the root that we take care of ourselves overall, you will not see the manifestation of a lot of these things. Everything is tied to what you input into your body, the foods that you eat, the mentality that you have, what you expose yourself to. If we limit our exposure to all this garbage and junk out here, if we limit to how much we eat, and if you do eat it, have a detoxification program that you can detox yourself from the chemicals that you take in your body. I think overall awareness, pushing that initiative is the first place that we start, because cancer is one of many. We all have that in common, but that's not the only thing. We're being taken out of here by heart attacks and everything else too. Cancer just didn't have a chance to pop up because the heart attack got you first.
So usually you're seeing your primary care for everything, right? And that's the person that's going to maybe give you the workup that's going to say, okay, well, something's not right. So how can we be more self-aware and self-advocate for ourselves to say, Doc, what else is out there? Right. And again, we know there are going to be those barriers like transportation, like childcare, like having to leave work, which that's something right there that's going to be a deal breaker for many people because they don't have the means to do that. But
Tiffany, can I interject real quickly with that? When I realized that, especially for every trial, and including this trial, I had to do a GoFundMe. I had to put myself out there. It's so vulnerable. It's so humbling and so vulnerable. But I really wanted to do it, but I had to go first. I couldn't wait for the reimbursement from the sponsor. So I had to put a plan together. I had to execute that plan. I had to take notes and create. It's so much preparation. It's a little academia involved, but how can I, and because I say this to myself and I'm like, boy, if I'm doing this and willing to do this, how can I encourage someone who may not have the skill set? Let's talk about that. And let's be very transparent with that. Everybody may not have the skill set and maybe the type of resources right away? And how do you encourage them to look past it and go to these, where can we have a list of resources? Where are these places to get support? And even when I was rejected, even when I found out that, well, you have to make this much in order to receive this, and you don't make enough to get this, what do you do with that rejection? I powered through it, but I'm just saying everybody doesn't have that, just that support system. So how do we encourage those kind of things first?
And this what I'm gonna just say one thing. I'm with an organization called Survivor, and it's a cervical cancer organization. First of all, they train us. Even though that I have cervical cancer, don't mean that I'm trained to go into the community to speak. Because before I can go into the community to speak to the people, I got to know the facts. And when I'm speaking, I got to give them the true facts. I can't just be up there talking just out of the top of my head because I have to have facts. So after they trained me, I already had a cancer organization because I started a cancer organization before I even knew I had cancer in the memory of my father. So I go around now in the community, the low income Black community and Hispanic community. I go in with MD Anderson now because now we have a relationship. So I go into the low income community with them. I tell them, leave their lab jackets at home. I need you to have on your jeans and your tennis shoes because I don't want the people to feel like we want to have a comfortable conversation where they'll open up to you. When I go in there, I'm bringing in resources because I can't go in there and telling you to get screening and then I don't have help for you. I can't leave you out there by yourself. So we got to have more of that going on. We got to go out there. So when I go out there, first of all, I tell my story because this is my community. This is where I grew up at. So start where you are. I go in there, I tell my story because Survivor done told me my story matters. So now they done got me with confidence and I'm out there in the street now. So I'm out there telling my story. So now we can have that conversation. And I partner with schools, business owners, and the church. That's all we need and go in the community. Those are the most important things in our communities. And there you go.
Amen. I wanted to say I wrote my book just for that reason, and I started in my church. We did a white ribbon build at my church. So, yep, start where you are. I love it.
I want to thank every single one of you. You all have made an impact in this conversation. To me, things that I've learned that I did not know, again, because I'll only know your experience if you share it. So thank you so much for being willing to share that with me and the patient story. I hope that we get to work together again. I think you're going to resonate with a lot of people, and not just in our community, because a lot of people need to understand they may be having the same question. If you're in medical school right now, pretty sure you're seeing the same stats we're seeing, but we're living it. You're just reading it. So if you're knowing that, this, you can kind of understand and get a bit bigger picture about why it's so important that, you know, we participate in these clinical trials that can literally save lives. So again, thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Nice meeting everyone.
I cannot thank our panel enough. Wow, what an electric and energizing conversation for sure. It doesn't take much for me to talk about clinical research, and sharing the room with Tony, Gwendolyn, Sharice, Letitia, Kayla, and Latasha was icing on the cake. To wrap up this discussion, I want you to leave with the takeaway that it is important to be empowered so that you and your caregivers can make informed decisions about your care. A reminder, we want to hear from you. A survey will pop up when this program closes, so do not go anywhere. Thanks again to our sponsor, J&J, for its support of our independent patient program, and to our promotional partners. Until next time, I'm Tiffany Drummond, signing off, and on behalf of the Patient Story, thank you for watching.